at page 141, Wright introduces the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, and he goes off into, in the middle of this quote-unquote narrative, he goes off into a 15-page thesis about how the RPF is somehow a form of brainwashing. And, you know, in other words, he's giving a whole narrative, and then he just suddenly goes off, takes a pivot and goes off into this, advocating this theory of his, which is a really sort of intellectually dishonest theory. He says that people are physically forced into the RPF, and that Wright says, despite federal laws against human trafficking and unlawful imprisonment, the FBI never opened the door on the RPF again. And of course, you know, Wright made a big deal about an ongoing FBI investigation in the around the time that he was writing this book, 2011, 2012. You know, I was intimately involved in that investigation, and from the beginning, from the very beginning, when I first met the agents involved in the investigation, 2009, they were the first ones that were trying to use this human trafficking label for the RPF. I mean, I just informed them, you know, in detail, as I did Larry Wright, that the RPF is anything but human trafficking. It is what it is. It's a rehabilitation project, and then if you were to go interview or canvass anybody partaking of it, and 99% of the people who have done it, they're going to describe it precisely as that. And so he begins with this, he introduces this term as if it's apropos to the RPF, which it absolutely isn't. The reason I bring up the feds is because, you know, he stated to me, Larry Wright stated to me that that he was going to do something in his New Yorker article, which was the predecessor that led to this book. He said to me that he was going to use that as some sort of nudge or leverage to kick the FBI into action. And so for him to then, and so by the time this book comes out, the FBI investigation, per my prediction, you know, was gone, was long since gone. And it was clear to me that the Justice Department had accepted my argument that this going into this predicating on this idea that the RPF has anything to do with human trafficking was a loser. Okay, it was clear to me from dealing with the Department of Justice lawyers from Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles that they accepted that this was just constitutionally impermissible for them to go down this route. 2 years after that, he publishes the book, Larry Wright does, and he characterizes the RPF as in violation of laws against human trafficking. So that's the predicate that he starts off with to make his brainwashing accusation, or his brainwashing theory. And he uses throughout that whole analysis Jesse Prince as his example. And I spent a lot of time, I don't know how many times I told him, you've got to evaluate Jesse Prince's credibility, because Jesse Prince has a history of saying whatever needs to be said. He was a paid witness for a number of years. It's a matter of court record in Clearwater, Florida, and Tampa, Florida. There was, you know, he engaged in conduct while he was acting as a quote-unquote consultant and expert and being paid for it. He engaged in conduct that, you know, really lewd conduct and aggressive conduct at the church's headquarters that essentially ended any credibility he ever had as a witness, and he actually disappeared because of that. He disappeared from the whole Scientology scene for a decade. And of course, this goes into a whole issue that I have with Larry Wright. I mean, he literally was saying to me, I don't know what you mean by evaluate his credibility. You mean I'm just supposed to ignore people because they did something? And I, was like, and this was one of those sort of shocking moments for me, like, I'm dealing with a Pulitzer Prize winning author and he doesn't understand what I mean by evaluating credibility. And I said the thing that Franks and Prince both have in common, having been involved in church defense work during their heydays, the two things those guys, they fit into a category that not a lot of other people fit into, and that was, the two things in common they had was, one, they were paid witnesses. Okay, they were being paid by anti-Scientology forces to testify in cases, not as experts, as fact witnesses. Okay, so in other words, they're being paid to testify to facts. Okay, you can't do that. Okay, that goes to somebody's credibility, number one. Number two, both of them, and I told them from my own personal experience in a number of cases, okay, in which I researched meticulously, both of those two were apt to say anything that the anti-Scientologists wanted them to say in order to perfect their narratives. So I warned him. I went over this, I don't know how many times, and I went over this with Larry Wright a number of times, in person, on the phone. He called me back, his fact checker, and I kept raising this. I finally just threw up my hands. I said, I just don't even want to talk to you guys about this anymore. You just won't get it. I said, you've got to evaluate credibility. And he says, I don't know what you mean. Wright says, I don't know what you mean by evaluating credibility. You want me to just not do it because there's something wrong with them?